Okay, if I could call the meeting to order, please. Good evening, warm welcome to you all and to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Growth and Development Scrutiny Group meeting. I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. And in addition, under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meeting and Access to Information England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. And may I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you're not speaking. Thank you very much. Hopefully you'll give me some leeway, my first chairing of this meeting, and I'll hopefully allow you all to speak and we'll get through the agenda as quickly as possible. We've got some external speakers this evening, which I could just introduce. We've got Stephen Marwood from the Environment Agency, Paul Goldsmith again from the Environment Agency, and Ian Stoddard from Nottinghamshire County Council. Thank you for attending. We'll just run through the agenda from the minutes from the last meeting, and then hopefully we'll come on to allow you the time to speak and present to us this evening. So the first item is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Solomon and Councillor Walker, and we have Councillor Reagan and Councillor Wheeler as substitutes this evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any declarations of interest from anyone present? No, thank you. If the minutes from the last meeting, which was held on the 3rd of January of this year, 2024, have been circulated to everybody. Are there any issues with accuracy that anyone wants to raise? Fantastic. Now, I'm aware that as a result of that meeting, Catherine Evans has circulated a paper to members with some of the updates from the item on the management of housing, which contains some information. That item is actually going to come back to this group in the spring of 2024 in any case. Catherine has kindly said that if anybody has any further questions that it raises from that, she's happy to take them away and get back to us with a detailed answer. Or alternatively, if people want to raise any queries on that now, we're not going to go into it here, but Catherine will note them down and get back to us. Councillor Chewings.
Thank you, Chair. Just obviously point out it's spring 2025. It's due to come back according to the paper, not spring 2024.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Look, I won't go into too much here, but it's disappointing. As a group, we came together across all parties and came to a collective decision about what we wanted to be done. And there's quite clearly been a bit of pushback, and obviously I put a scrutiny matrix in to try and get this to move forward. It's been turned down. Now, for me, there's got to be a question, and the question has to be, there is such an interest in this matter. This has been kicked down the line once again to spring next year. There seems to be a fear from Rushcliffe to look into this matter, and this matter is coming to me on a daily basis or weekly basis with issues, and I know the councils are facing this as well. We look back at that last meeting and we had significant numbers of people present at that meeting with an interest. The press even reported on it and went into the local press, and we're kicking it down the line till spring next year. For me, it's disappointing. I don't think it's appropriate to wait till spring next year, and I will be using other methods to bring it to the forefront, both internally from the council, but also politically speaking as well.
Did you have any questions or anything to raise for Catherine at this point, or are you happy to raise them via email with her? Because as I understand it, she has provided some of the responses for some of the questions we raise. That has in itself raised some further questions that I know members will have. And she said she's more than happy to take away your queries and come back to you. So I don't think it has been kicked down the line, Councillor Chewings. The officers present are prepared to look into the questions we have and take further questions, and it is coming back to this committee, so it's not been kicked down the line. So I don't think that's accurate. However, if you've got anything that you want to raise now, you can do so, and Catherine will take it away. Alternatively, if you want to, you just do it by email and we will get the results back to everybody circulated through email.
To check, spring 2025 is kicking down the line. That's about that comment.
So that's a no then, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the sewerage infrastructure and discharge within Rushcliffe. We have members of the Environment Agency here that want to present to us on this subject. So the floor is yours, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a quick introduction. So I'm Paul Goldsmith. I work for the Environment Agency in the Sustainable Places team, and I work as a planning specialist. Sustainable Places is essentially the town planning arm of the Environment Agency. So internally within the Environment Agency, what I essentially do is collate all of the responses from our specialist teams. So I have people that deal with groundwater contaminated land, flood risk, across a broad range of areas. I have to admit, I had quite a long presentation. Had a chat with Catherine, and it had to cut some of it down. I've been wobbling on for about half an hour. So the detail about sewage infrastructure is actually included. It's been taken out. It's in the longer version, which has been supplied to Catherine. So if there's any questions that come from that after this, it's more a whistle stop introduction from me and some of the areas we cover in my planning team. Next slide, please, Catherine. So essentially, we respond to both strategic and development control planning consultations. I deal with the strategic side of things as the planning specialist. We cover the whole of the East Midlands. We cover Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, and the whole of the Peak District National Park area. Encompassing 28 local planning authorities. So I'm actually patch lead for Nottinghamshire. So anything Rushcliffe will come through me. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of planning, what do we comment on? So we cover a broad range of specialisms, and we comment on a number of different planning documents. These could include fluvial flood risk, so anything within flood zones 3A and flood zones 3B. We sometimes comment on flood zone 2, although the majority of those are handled by the local planning officers within Rushcliffe, who apply national flood risk standard advice for those. We look at groundwater and contaminated land sites. So anything from previous uses of heavy industry through to historic landfills, those types of things that that team would look into. Land and water, so looking at surface water quality, that's during construction and post-construction. Our fisheries, biodiversity and geomorphology teams, so anything to do with aquatic life, protection of biodiversity and enhancement of biodiversity. And regulated industry, so things like power stations, anaerobic digestion plants, the permitting that goes along with that. So in terms of strategic planning, on to the next slide, please, Catherine. So what do we look at primarily? So documents, that pretty much any document that forms part of the local plan. So we look at water cycle strategies. We've recently commented on that for the Greater Nottingham Strategic Plan. The strategic flood risk assessments, surface water management plans, strategic infrastructure plans, environmental and/or blue and green infrastructure studies, and strategic housing, employment, land availability assessments, or you may have heard them called SLARs, as well as all the main plan documents that make up the local plans. So in terms of what we do when we receive these, so we'll be able to provide bespoke comments to each of these, and we refer back to national planning policy. We promote best practice designed to protect and enhance the environment we live in. Next slide, please, Catherine. So Rushcliffe Borough Council, alongside Broxtowe Borough, Gedling Borough and Nottingham City Councils, are currently preparing the Greater Nottingham Strategic Plan, and we've been working closely with all of those partners to support the production of that new strategic plan. We offer support and advice, and we've been provided across a wide range of disciplines, and we've actually contributed to quite a lot of comments and proposed amendments, which have been taken forward by and large for the strategic flood risk assessment update, the water cycle study, as previously mentioned, and site allocations. So I think we'll highlight if site allocations potentially are in flood zones, or if there's been any previous uses that might have ground contamination, for example. So we'll cover a broad range of subjects. And of course, we'll continue to support our partners and throughout that process. Next slide, please, Catherine. So that's the strategic side of things. We also look at development control applications. So we're consulted by the local planning authorities and statutory consultees. Where application sites are located within areas of constraint within the remit of the Environment Agency. So these could include, but not limited to, flood zones, sites in flood zones 3A and 3B. Sites located on or close to polluting previous uses, so historic landfills, heavy industry, applications within source protection zones, applications located close to regulated sites, intensive farming applications. And in terms of flood risk, as I mentioned previously, we don't generally see flood zone 2 applications because we're covered under National Flood Risk Standard Advice, although we will, of course, support planning officers if they've got any difficulties with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so our role as a statutory consultee. So the advice we provide is given essentially as advice, and ultimately decision maker, in this case Rushcliffe Borough Council, can choose to overrule our comments. It's extremely rare, but it does sometimes happen. And our comments inform part of the material considerations which the RPA take into account when determining an application. So, as an example, for when on the rare occasion that our comments are overruled, we may have commented on flood risk, for example, but there may be reasons, other planning reasons why that outweighs the comments on flood risk. So that often leads to quite a lot of back and forth discussion. And where we've objected to applications which subsequently go to appeal, we will of course support the LPA throughout the appeal process. We make written representations, or we can appear in person at a hearing. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of flood risk, how does our role differ from our key strategic partners? So the Environment Agency work closely with our key partners at Severn Trent Water, the lead local flood authority. Our primary remit is with regard to flood risk from fluvial flood risk sources emanating from both main rivers, which is our main kind of bag, if you like, but we do also comment on applications where there is an ordinary watercourse and the flood map for planning indicates that that site or part of that site could fall within flood zone 3. So, as an example, there the Environment Agency we hold hydraulic modelling for most main rivers. Although we don't hold hydraulic modelling for ordinary watercourses, they generally fall under the remit of the lead local flood authority. However, we do request that an applicant undertakes hydraulic modelling where it's shown from the flood map for planning that a site is impacted by flood zone 3 from an ordinary watercourse. So we do kind of go beyond main rivers at times. We're the regulator for the sewage sector, so we look at Severn Trent Water, and we ensure that the required permits are applied for and adhered to, and we require the regulator to report any discharges and water quality testing results on a regular basis. We do on rare occasions highlight surface water flood risk, however we do not provide detailed comments because obviously we trust the opinion of our colleagues in the LLFA. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the recent storms, Babbitt and Henk. So Storm Babbitt, within Rushcliffe, there were 29 properties impacted that we're aware of across 3 communities, with the greatest impact within Rushcliffe being felt in the community of Radcliffe. and at the Water Sports Centre. However, Storm Henk was a larger scale event, and subsequently quite a few more properties were impacted. So 143 across 19 communities. And the final slide, please. So since those storm events, we're currently in the recovery phase. So we have a recovery cell. Within that recovery cell, we've got various officers going out to the local communities, knocking on doors, finding out how they've been impacted by flooding, trying to get an idea of where the source of that flooding has come from. Do they think it's surface water? Is it from a river, a fluvial source? And to date, we've undertaken the largest number of community information officer visits and intel gathering across all of our regional divisions of the EA. So we're really putting a huge focus on trying to work out where this flood risks are coming from and how we can better manage those in the future. And of course, what we'll be able to then do is share some of that intel that we've built with our partners at Severn Trent Water and the lead local flood authority to build more resilient communities. That's essentially the end of the presentation. Like I say, it's very much a whistle-stop tour. There is one final page there, Catherine, just to give some contact details. Like I said, we've got a number of different disciplines within the EA, but rather than send you around to lots of different people because it becomes quite a minefield, you're more than welcome to have any kind of query or question to do with anything the EA do. More than welcome to come to me or to Steve in the first instance, and we can get that to the right teams and the right people within the EA. And yes, that's it. Like I say, there is a Catherine has got a director's cut that she will be able to send around to everyone. So if any further questions do come from that, by all means drop me an email.
Thank you. Mr. Marwood, do you want anything to add or to the presentation?
Not from me, Chair, but just to say that in terms of those, just to reiterate what Paul said in terms of those community impacts from Storm Henk and Storm Babette, it has been termed within our areas the winter of many incidents, and we're seeing more frequent incidents coming through, which is something that I'll touch on in my next presentation. I think we've seen some of the biggest impacts since 1945 in terms of impacted properties across the county within the East Midlands, which is taking a big response and resource to alleviate that flood risk and sort of getting engaged with our communities. But I'll come on to my presentation in a minute around some of the adaptive opportunities that hopefully we can have a look at.
Do you want to go straight into that, and we'll take questions on both at the end? Is that okay with both of you? Unless anyone's got any burning questions specifically on the part that Mr. Goldsmith's just presented on.
Too short. Very short. Thanks, Chair. Just two short questions. Can you just define an ordinary watercourse for me, please?
Yes. So essentially, oh, sorry. Yeah. So they're essentially so we've got main rivers. So the way we define a main river is it's normally based on the level of impact that it could have on a community. So if there's a large number of houses or something like that, then it would be classified as a main river. It falls under the remit of the Environment Agency. We would then maintain and sort of regularly inspect the defences and assets that protect those communities. An ordinary watercourse is normally a smaller watercourse that runs through maybe a much smaller community. It is normally a tributary of the main river, so it'll feed back into the main river, and that falls. That is essentially it. That's in simple terms, and that is dealt with by the lead local flood authority normally. So, and the differentiation there is where we do have that overlap with the lead local flood authority is where, like I mentioned, with the flood map for planning, the flood map for planning is quite a broad brush modelling, and all it essentially is looking to do, the flood map for planning, is to show what would the risks be if there was no infrastructure in place, there were no defences, and where would the water spread? And that's to give an idea of the worst case scenario. So for those smaller watercourses, those ordinary watercourses, if there is overspill from those, then and that impacts where a potential building site is, for example, a development site, then we do then have the powers to kind of go in and say, look, you need to model this. We need to see what those impacts are. So yeah, I'm not sure. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Absolutely. Just briefly, Chair, have you ever appealed a decision yourselves when the local planning authorities decided to overrule your recommendations?
No, not in our area. We haven't at the moment. It's not happened. We've not needed to get to that stage. Rushcliffe are one of the best local authorities to work with in terms of planning. Very receptive to our responses. Always willing to work with us to reach a solution. We don't really have any major issues with our local authorities. Touch wood. Although. Yeah, we do have some minor issues with one that will remain nameless, but we're working through those at the moment. We're coming to a solution there, but no, we've never felt the need to actually appeal any decisions at the moment. Hopefully we won't.
Thank you. Mr. Marwood, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just first of all introduce myself. My name's Stephen Marwood. I'm Sustainable Growth Manager at the Environment Agency, and my remit and role is really on developing strategic partnerships. And something I wanted to highlight today and take the opportunity to do was something you'll see on your desks is really just very briefly go over a commissioned report in partnership with Nottinghamshire County Council, and this was looking at a district and county view of environmental constraint and adaptive opportunities from that. If I just go on to the first slide, thank you, Catherine. Where did this come from? So the adaptive investment prospectus itself grew out of a couple of pathways. One was initial engagement with Nottinghamshire County Council and its recently published Inward Investment Framework. I've also brought a copy along with that and managed to get some copies from the county there as well. So it's something additional that can be reviewed. So this is going to be, again, I'll use the word again, a whistle-stop tour. It is a 90-page report, but the majority of this is made up of district and county scorecard visualizations on environmental constraints. So hopefully not too much bedtime reading for people. One of the things that we looked at as well in terms of that inward investment framework was the county's appetite to look at investment priorities around being healthy, prosperous and green. The other was to provide an engagement platform with district and borough councils on environmental constraint and creating sustainable growth. So one of the things on that early look of the region, we identified some significant gaps in understanding and awareness of the distribution of environmental inequality and its subsequent constraints. Also, what some of those growth stimulating benefits may be from addressing them. We were also approached by the county to help with this look across the D2N2 patch itself, so Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, and help with those findings in the emerging combined authority and the potential for adaptive investment to become a key strand within a key strand of action within that structure. The precursor to the prospectus was a district director workshop which we held in September 2022. And David Banks, the neighbourhood director, was in attendance to that alongside some other district directors, having a look at the first baseline evidence that we presented there. Within that workshop, the data and findings were played back really to gain some early reflections and understand what resonated and what they might want to explore further, what might want to be challenged. And it became apparent there was an appetite to publish the outputs, and hence the document you have in front of you today. Next slide, please, Catherine. So the methodology that was created was to use core 7 place themes from the 2021 Environment Act and utilise some other national data sets around environmental quality. We created those visual rankings across the 326 local authorities in England. So it was a comparison across those, and they included things like flood risk, but also social value indicators like indices of multiple deprivation, health, and GVA is an economic indicator. What we were keen to do was to look at environment alongside health and social indicators together and economic indicators. So how do we become enablers of sustainable growth, sometimes rather than a blocker? So we were looking at across the broad range of spectrum of indicators. This gave us a good visual representation that we could break down from a county overview first, and then look into district and boroughs as individual scorecards. The district scorecards can be used as pullouts and what have you, for those areas that need to review on a more distinct level. And the prospectus has also looked at bolt-on opportunities in terms of data, in terms of potentially, as this is a district level view, are there opportunities to look at neighbourhood scale, ward, lower super output area, where those pockets of environmental constraint that really impact our communities, air quality, can we actually start painting a picture on a more kind of detailed and granular level? Other things that we're looking at as well, that could be opportunities, is extreme heat. We're now coming out, fingers crossed, we're coming out of a period of flood incidents, but we're now going to be concentrating very shortly, I'm sure, in terms of drought, in terms of impacts with that, extreme heat, how's that going to impact agricultural sector, food security, things like that as well. So really, there's an appetite to start exploring extreme heat and the impacts on communities with that. Also, I think as well, sorry, next slide, please, Catherine. Thank you. So here, another part of the section of this report is here. We wanted to sort of look at the analysis of what those common causes and consequences are and build that as a narrative. So it can engage a number of stakeholders, communities as well, and obviously speak to that wide range of people. Also, we wanted people to sort of think about solutions, and is there a valuable education element within this report that we could potentially use and build on? We wanted to have a look at common characteristics of places, so we could identify some of those unique challenges in terms of sets and places. Take in those local perceptions, but also how we might look at common issues between districts and how we might address them together. Place characterizations would need to take that lead from partners, communities themselves, just that understanding and that local understanding of places as well. Next slide, please, Catherine. Another section within the report was then started to look at the climate risk and compounding threats of those particular place characterizations. And then the report, we looked at topics such as heat waves, increase in frequency, longevity, how it leads to drought, heat island effects, wildfires. Also, the increased health vulnerabilities and exposure to poor air quality. So some of the indicators within the scorecards look at that. Thinking about the increase in, as well as just coming out of a winter of sort of flood incidences, that increase in summer flash and rainfall events, vulnerability of industrial transitioning towns, water scarcity threats, and intensive agriculture, and that competitiveness and that risk to flight within our areas as well. And then lastly, just go to the next slide, please, Catherine. And lastly, we've got a section on adaptive opportunities. So thinking about, from all that narrative and all that evidence, what could be realised? How do we sort of consider the cost of putting interventions in place early enough so they can be adopted, integrated and implemented, and hopefully outweigh the future cost of not doing those things? And what we've done today is provide you with some of those links. So as well as a physical copy, there's a link. It's now being hosted on the Nottinghamshire County Council website alongside their inward investment framework. And really what I'd like to do after today is really gain, hopefully after you've had a chance to look at it in more detail, some of your reflections on that. Again, what resonates with yourselves, what kind of next steps you might want to see from that. We're also working again with the County Council they're going to be going out to doing some district mapping workshops, looking at projects and ideas that the districts have, and also how does that overlay with some of the intelligence that we've brought to them through this and their inward investment plans as well. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Just one, if I could start off, please. It's just looking at the numbers on these scorecards. I'm pleased to see that Rushcliffe's only got one category in the red, but just what do the numbers actually relate to in these scorecards? Because they obviously some that look really low aren't necessarily got the same colour that you would associate with that higher number.
Yeah. What the number that you actually get an overall environmental inequality indicator, which is again measured. It's a simpler measurement against 326 other local authorities. And on page 10 of the report, you will see how that's broken down, how each indicator is broken down into a constitute data sets. So, for example, breadth and protection of plants and wildlife would look at data sets around special areas of conservation, local nature reserves, ancient woodland. Whereas if you're looking at clean and plentiful water indicator, that's looking at elements of our water framework directive and classifications. It's looking at water resource availability, abstraction. So you can break down into those each indicators within the actual prospectus what that's made up from. We can also share absolutely in terms of the background scorecards and the background data to that for more exploration as we go through in there as well. Does that answer the question?
That does, thank you. And I think it's there's a lot more detail in the back, which goes into describing what each of these categories are, which I'll look at in due course. I'll throw it open for questions on either presentation.
Yeah, just building on your initial question, Chair. Some of these things you might not necessarily expect. I suppose I'm a little bit surprised to see Rushcliffe as the third worst in Nottinghamshire for environmental inequality, and I'll pinpoint specifically the plants and wildlife score, which is obviously our worst score, 295. There's some pretty other bad scores. The flood risk one is a little bit more explainable. I kind of get that a bit more intuitively because of our location next to the River Trent, and of course the River Smythe as well in my ward and others. But what's behind the plants and wildlife issue specifically? Because we're quite a rural ward, Steve, and it's
Plenty of country parks.
Plenty of country parks, exactly. So what's behind that particularly low score that we have there? Thanks,
Councillor. Yeah, it's funny enough. David said exactly the same thing when he looked at this before he came to the workshop. He says, "I look out, and I say green, and I say, and I say a nice landscape." But really, it's down to those classifications. So you might have areas of vast green space and what have you. But do you have those sites of special scientific interest and those classifications? Because that's what we're actually basing those indicators on. So it's each of those which will make up that scorecard. Now, you can cut the data and you can look at various different data sets and it will give you potentially a different view. But that's why we've had to list those specific data sets that has made up that overall score. And we can provide the background data to that way we can break down each of those different individual data sets. But yes, it's more about the different classifications, RSPB reserves, special areas of protection. Do you have those that then uplifts that score?
So if we've never had any of those, that would adversely affect our score.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
But so presumably then the new biodiversity gains on planning should hope to try and redress some of this in the future.
Absolutely. And it's about how do we look at these and think of, well, first of all, do we agree that those are the right things to look at? Second of all, how do we turn the dial on those? Interestingly enough, before I came here tonight, I know there's a variety of different interventions going on in terms of refurbishment of play areas, play parks. I think Boundary Road play area has been mentioned, Ad Bolton Lane, and there's plans for Greythorn Drive and Rushcliffe Country Park. So do these interventions, how do they actually turn those dial and sort of do it? And this is really not, this is a report that officers can use, that departments can use, that can have a look, interrogate, come back to us, can ask questions of that, work with us to look at that. Some of this is outside of our remit, as it were, in terms of it. But what we're trying to do is work in partnership to look at a range of indicators, not just flood risk, and especially, sorry for going on, but especially because we're in we're in a situation where resources are tight across all our organisations. How do we share data and evidence and skills to just paint a better picture?
Thank you. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, you've touched on that actually, but I wanted to go back really to what we've experienced with you mentioned Storm Babette and Storm Henk and the impact of that and the extreme weather we've had. And various members, both here and across the councils in general, have had the situation where we've had residents who have been badly affected, and we all know how devastating it is. How does it work with regards to ensuring that the relevant authorities are aware of what's happened? And I'm very aware that the different authorities have different responsibilities, but there is bound to be some crossover, isn't there, between the different the things that different agencies and authorities do. And I think one of the biggest, as well as being people who've been flooded and had it to contend with, one of the biggest worries that people have as well is, okay, I've been flooded, I've reported it, what's going to happen next? Because it is traumatic, and I'm not being patronising, but it is, it's awful, even with relatively small amounts of water. So can we be sure that well, I'm sure this is happening, but the authorities talking to each other, but crucially, are we feeding back to the people who have been badly affected, the residents? Because I do wonder sometimes whether, because you and colleagues are so very busy getting on with the job, sometimes residents, I mean, I've had people who said to me, can you tell me what's happening? So are we confident, and how does that all work, if that makes sense?
Excellent question, Councillor. I think, especially through these last events and what have you, you're right. But when we see these events occurring and happening, we've got a lot of resource going out in the field to alleviate that immediate flood risk and try and obviously and reduce the impacts on those communities. And that's exactly when the sort of data intelligence gathering exercise happens. People that are impacted from in some of these communities, and I've been out to myself, who've had 2, 3, 4 events they're having to deal with, and the mental health impacts. And I know of residents that as soon as the rain hits the window, the anxiety levels are rising right through the roof. And how do we give them that empowerment to sort of feel like they're not just helpless, So there's things like, obviously we've got a flood warning service, and they can have a look and see where, when and where things might start to impact them. But we're looking at sort of opportunities for them to be able to even just tell us that they're flooding, because sometimes we don't get that intelligence immediately, and we're trying to build up that local picture. That's where working with the local lead flood authority and the likes, I think Callum was here last time, and the rest, and Joshua Wells and others, because they're helping us to paint that picture as well. So they will get people ringing them up. So we obviously got a flood line where residents will call, but they've also got a variety of different outlets to get that information to them. So the local officers will be able to share information through we have tactical control groups. So when we have events happening, we're all around the table thinking about the response. But during that response, we're trying to get as much intelligence as we can to say, where do we need to focus our resources during an event? The next part of that is intelligence after this. So after things have calmed down, that's when we start to really mobilise and get our community information officers out there, because that's where we get the key information from residents about. They might, for example, say, yeah, the gully at the back of my house is blocked and it's stopping the flow of water. Where did that water come in from? Well, it didn't. This time it came from here. It didn't. So all this intelligence help us. We have surveys. We go out and we take all that information and we build it into some dashboards and visual dashboards. Just last week, we had a conversation with Joshua Wells, the county data lead, a data lead at Derbyshire and a data lead at Leicestershire, to talk about how do we share data better during an event and after event, because also there's the property flood resilience process. So communities and people want to know, well, how can I protect my property? How can I access grants? How can I access funding to support that, as well as what we're doing with a larger program? So all this information, so we need to try and pass that on to the local lead flood authority so they know what's been impacted as well. So that speeds up that PFR process. There's a Section 19 report process as well, which after that, so where we're really building a picture and getting into the intricate detail. So it's all this information coming together that helps us to think about how do we respond to the next event. And then also, It's that, how does that influence our investment programme? So we've got a consented programme from 21 to 27. All right, that goes through a number of refresh and a number of looks, and we're looking at pipeline projects. So the impacts that we're seeing with communities now, we need to understand how is that changed from what we know from modelling into something different. It might not be the same as what we've pictured it in the past. So how does that influence our longer term investment? So there are some of the things, and we are working, we keep continually trying to build that data and visualization picture, and share information is definitely something we need to do better with. I would love to see, where, the communities have an opportunity to tell us immediately when they're flooding through technology, whether it be an app, whether it be as they're looking at the flood warning, they've got an opportunity to do that. So there's various people at National looking at different things, and with our incident response, how do we engage communities more?
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You talk about engaging with partners across the piece. Now, because of both serious incidents there, Wilford Lane, most of you probably know, and the tram line, you probably do know. One part of it falls in the city, one part of it falls in the county. The tram line is basically the dividing line between city and county, which I'm sure you're aware of. A serious problem for flooding there, mainly from the city side as it flows into Rushcliffe, which is called Park County. Trying to engage with Severn Trent is like pulling teeth. We set up a meeting and the council at the last minute saying it wasn't important enough. Seriously, it wasn't important enough. So no fault or blame with Rushcliffe County, Environment Agency. Severn Trent seem to be a law unto themselves, and they do what they want to do. If they don't want to do it, they won't do it. That herein lies the problem. And that was really irritating because so many different partners were involved in the discussion, which Severn Trent just said, no, nothing's important enough, we won't bother coming. You can't not have them there because they feed into that process to establish what the hell the water goes to. So you just cannot do that. So it's so important, and you guys use whatever power, control, what mechanisms you've got, to bash them over the head and say, take this seriously. It is important for you to engage with all the various partners, not pick and choose that you do like and that you don't want to do. Okay, that's the first part of it. Secondly, you mentioned SSI and the fact we haven't got enough. We lost a major SSI when the tram line was built in Rushcliffe. And despite 3 public inquiries, of which I attend all 3 of them, the inquiry inspector overruled all the bodies fed into it. The Nottingham Wildlife Trust, who Rushcliffe have a fantastic relationship with, for a long time. They even gave evidence to the public inquiry. It was a needs overruled an SSI. So that's the problem we face. So we would have had this wonderful 3 SSI had the public inquiry not ruled that it's a tram corridor, should destroy all of that and take that wonderful amenity and facility away from us. So to not follow Rushcliffe gave evidence of the inquiry as well to protect that, but it was completely overruled. So it's something that needs to be considered as well. In the process, and as I say, you've got Claypits as well, which is mentioned, which is of course overseen by Nottingham Wildlife Trust, and they, as I said, they also give evidence to the inquiry. But again, to not fault of Rushcliffe or anyone else, that was lost. And once you've lost it, well, you know, it's gone, isn't it?
I think we can understand why that one might be read on there. Thank you, Councillor. It's one thing I wanted to bring us back to. I appreciate that this is from an older scrutiny matrix from 2022. When Severn Trent did actually come, but Councillor Wheeler did hit the nail on the head. I think there's been a frustration from this committee that they haven't turned up at a number of subsequent requests. But I suppose, for Mr. Goldsmith, in terms of, you mentioned that you were the regulator, if you like, for Severn Trent. Certainly, and this matrix is more to do with the sewerage infrastructure relating to primarily new developments, and we've had quite a number, and we still have more to come of the new developments yet. And certainly some of our residents seem to believe that those developments have been the cause of flooding further downhill, so to speak, certainly within West Bridgford area. How are you regulating Severn Trent and ensuring that the infrastructure is upgraded to cope with the additional flow? Because when you put these new estates up, the infrastructure, the flood ponds, etc., may well be there for the runoff, etc. but the additional volume further downstream doesn't get upgraded. So how do you, as the regulator, hold them to account and ensure that they can then cope with the increased demand, the increased volumes, and keep updating their infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's quite a difficult one to answer because I'm not a technical specialist in terms of from that side of the Environment Agency. But essentially, what they should be doing within the planning process, so early planning, to make sure that that any developer is working with Severn Trent Water to find out what the capacity is. Are there any capacity issues? I know Severn Trent Water did do quite a lot of work, and that you can access quite a lot of information on their website actually to find out what areas are impacted by capacity issues, and really that should be the trigger point for Severn Trent Water to be saying, right, we need to improve capacity, we need to improve the infrastructure. In terms of regulation, it's quite difficult. It's quite a long-winded process, unfortunately, to bring kind of water companies to task about it. So it can be quite long drawn out through the court system to impose things like fines and things like that. So it's very difficult for me to give a definitive answer, I'm afraid. But I will be able to go back and speak to some of my specialist colleagues and come back.
I think
to
we would appreciate that as a committee.
Yes,
Is there a plan in place of inspections to make sure that these things are re-looked at further down the line?
Yeah, I mean our permitting officers, they will regularly visit all of our permitted sites. And obviously the water company, Severn Trent Water, are one of those. They will have permits that they need to adhere to. They can only discharge a certain number of times. There can't be too many overflows within a year, and that can then trigger the escalation process if they exceed those. But the trouble is with things like that is you've got the flood issues, but you've also got the environmental impact as well, which has been in the news a lot. And while it's getting a lot of public attention, it's very difficult to work your way towards that resolution with them. So yeah, we are constantly trying to work with them. If they're in breach of their permits, then that will get escalated. But yeah, I can find out the exact process for you. One of the things I was going to suggest actually is my regular attendance at this scrutiny board, and what I can then do is bring some of my sort of colleagues from our specialist team. So if you want to look at anything to do with sort of sewerage, you can bring along someone from the permitting team that can go through the whole process, talk to you about escalation, what we do when there's overflows, how we regulate those, the water companies. If it's about flood risk, we can bring someone from the flood risk team. So I'll be able to set those up absolutely and answer any questions via email, or I can bring people along to future meetings. If
That would probably be quite helpful if we can have that for a future agenda item at some point in the future. But I know it's been a frustration, not necessarily this committee with Severn Trent not turning up, but I know on other committees, planning, etc., some of the schemes that have been going, they seem to have a bland 3-line response to some of the applications, and it's very difficult to find rationales and hold them to account afterwards.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there are other methods for managing the flood risk that isn't necessarily dependent on, say, a pump station, for example. So you can, it's within the public realm. You can go out and search it on Google. But Severn Trent have got quite a large, heavily invested work that they're doing within Mansfield, and that is essentially like an urban SUDS system. So they're putting in a lot of SUDS features that will capture some of that water, stop it getting into the combined sewers, and take some of that, what we call the peak off of the event. So it allows the system to kind of catch up with itself and work the way it should do. So by not allowing as much water to get into the system as quickly as it currently does. So, yeah, I mean, those are the types of things that we would hope as partner organisations we can continue to work with them. We've done quite a lot of work with them on the Mansfield scheme. So yeah, it's definitely something we want to look at as a broader thing with Severn Trent Water. So I can certainly send everyone some details about the Mansfield work, so you can see what the types of things that they can do. So, and hopefully we can spread that across different areas as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Way.
Thank you. I look back at the recording of the meeting that we had last time when there was Environment Agency and Severn Trent here. And there seemed to be a bit of a conflict, and I wondered if you could comment on it. That the gentleman from the Environment Agency said all developments should connect to existing drainage network, and the developer needs to ensure there is available capacity within receiving network and treatment works. Severn Trent said developers have a right to connect to the sewerage system. We are unable to refuse a connection due to lack of capacity. And those two things seem to be almost in contradiction, and I wondered if you had any comments on that.
We, in terms of the way we look at sewerage when we get a planning application in, for example, is there's a hierarchy. So first and foremost, we would like to see it connected to the mains sewer, because obviously we don't want, so we'd prefer that than and being going off and treating, rather than it being kind of treated and discharged to land, for example, to infiltrate. So, but there is that hierarchy there. So, while we do prefer them to go on to the mains, then there is alternatives. I'm under the impression that no, you can't stop someone from connecting to the mains system. However, during the planning application stage, Severn Trent Water do have an opportunity to comment upon a development if they've got concerns about capacity, and make that a strong sort of comment back to the planning officer. So yeah, that's the best I can answer, I'm afraid. It's I think there's certainly more work we can do as a partner organisation to Severn Trent Water to work in partnership, and I think that's what we're going to need to do moving forward, again with the legal local flood authority as well. But we need to look at innovative ways of sort of slowing the flows, in my opinion, like natural flood management schemes, SUDs and things like that. So let's stop that water getting to the source as quickly as it currently does, take some of that pressure off of what are quite aging systems in a lot of places. So for a new development, for example, while we'll say, right, a new development, they would need to have a separate foul and sort of water, fresh water, if you like, or wastewater pipes, but these still feed into old, archaic, in many respects, combined sewers. So it feels like sometimes it defeats the object of having that separation.
That was the question I asked earlier in the as the regulator, how do you enforce Severn Trent to update some of that out of date infrastructure if you can?
Yeah, at the moment, I don't think there is a process by which we can force them to upgrade the system. I mean, essentially, their argument would be that it goes into the combined sewer, that would then go through to a process in a wastewater treatment plant, that would get processed, and then sort of clean water passed back into the system. It's about making sure that the right capacity is at those wastewater treatment works. I think it would be a huge undertaking to replace the amount of combined sewers, a very expensive one. So trying to find that solution with them is going to be challenging. So
just moving forward, if members have issues with the sewerage, the runoff or any other thing like that might be a Severn Trent issue, as the regulator, can we come to you to, if we can't get hold of Severn Trent or can't get them to turn up to here pass those concerns
anything
forward?
like that can be, we've got an incident line, so anything can be reported to them. You can also come to me, just email through to me, and then I can disseminate that through to the right team, and we can certainly get some replies back to members.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Any other? First, Councillor Graycock.
Right. Thanks. I want to return to Steve's report actually a little bit and these indicators, because it's an interesting thing for me to see this, because we can see Rushcliffe's doing very well on the more holistic measures, indices of multiple deprivation, your health and disability. As we always know, we tend to top these tables. We tend to do pretty well across Nottinghamshire and indeed the wider region. It seems to me that there's something to go at here from an environmental equality or environmental development point of view, in terms of a resource. So my question really is, do we or could we think of either developing or resourcing Catherine with enough people to develop an environmental improvement or environmental development or environmental equality plan? And for Steve, what partnerships and networks already exist that are looking at this, perhaps at a more county or regional level, but actually really needs to be done at a local level? It seems to me we've got some quite distinct challenges here, and we can't solve them all. We can't sit here and say, well, some of these things are just a feature of how Rushcliffe is as it is, but just as some of the features that we benefit from are part of the features of how Rushcliffe is as affluent as it is, the boundary and where it is. For example, we've got a lot of intensive agriculture. Maybe that's part of the challenges here. But it seems to me that it'd be worthwhile having some sort of environmental development or environmental improvement plan that would try and move us up this particular league table, just because, we are used to being quite near the top of league tables in these things. So what already exists already? What are other councils doing in this space? Is my question to Steve and to the officers. Is this something we could pursue? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor, and I appreciate the suggestion. And in terms of those mechanisms currently, so yes, there are. I have seen examples of other districts where we've got. I've seen the Nottingham City Council Green Strategy Plan. There's a variety of different things and different information coming through in networks, partnership groups that try to move the dial forward on a number of different issues. There's a group that I attend. There's an Economic Development Officers group that I attend with the place manager Nicholas Stevens at the county, and we're exploring with the county as to what other mechanisms we can use. For example, the county developing from this inward investment framework, which is the separate thing, is some of the district engagement, some of the understanding what the projects and priorities are, and especially around the green growth agenda. How do local nature recovery strategies start to look at aspects of this as well and can improve on that? We've mentioned biodiversity net gain. There's a variety of different strategic plans coming to fruition in spatial mapping that should be able to help us understand a bit more where the interventions are going to have the most impact. One of the areas that we're looking at the moment, and I touched on it briefly at the beginning, is are there opportunities within the emerging mayoral combined authority where we can start using some of the devolved funding and what have you to start looking at these pictures across districts, across counties, where there are areas of concern, local nature recovery strategies, how do we engage that? So at the moment, it's very hard for, say, for example, someone like yourself to cover all the districts. I cover the East Midlands, but is there a mechanism through, for example, like I've said, the county, through the combined authority, where we want to bring this adaptive investment and environmental constraint thinking to the table? And there's a very big appetite to do that. I think there's a net zero and environment strand that's been led by Wayne Bexton, which is looking at things like what we mentioned earlier, a regional flood alleviation strategy, local nature recovery, waste. So that I think it's early days, but I think there's the buds, as it were, of partnership coming together. And like I mentioned before, it's going to take shared brain. It's going to take academics. It's going to take our universities and other people to come together to think about how do we resolve issues in our districts. But exploration of those mechanisms, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I know Ms Evans wants to respond as well. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say, so as Stephen's mentioned, we've got a Notts-wide economic growth officers group that I chair. It's got a county, the city, and the 7 districts on it. I've had many conversations with Nicola, the place manager at the county council, about this piece of work and the inward investment framework and various other things that are coming forward. As you all know, we're developing our economic growth strategy, and I see sustainable growth as a key part of that. And whilst I don't understand everything in this report, doing a bit of kind of research around this and having further conversations with Steve and other people about that and how we can link that together to make sure that we don't lose sight of this. And obviously, we've also got our climate change action plan, nature conservation strategy, and what role they play in all of this. I think, as Steve said, there's lots of things out there. It's about trying to join it all up. But to assure you, there are conversations happening with the county council and other colleagues around a lot of this work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that you've probably gone a lot further than the original scrutiny matrix was about sewerage infrastructure, and you've kindly brought these fantastic reports with the charts and how Rushcliffe's performing, which is really interesting. I know the members will go away and look at it. We've got 2 recommendations on this item. One was to review the scrutiny matrix and ask questions of our experts, which I think we have all done, and everyone's had the opportunity of doing that. And the second one was to identify if there were any areas of further work or updates. Sorry, Councillor Cotty.
Sorry to interrupt. I just glanced over and noticed the flood risk is 251 on there, and on mine it's 168, 169. I just wondered what happened. What happened? Obviously, good or bad.
Apologies, Councillor. You've probably got an older version which has been updated, so I'll need to take that off you.
This one's the same.
Yeah, no, there's.
So is it 251 or 169?
It will be 251. Yeah,
it will be. Okay.
These were produced before the storm.
Yeah, very well. That was just to test you, by the way.
Oh, right. Okay.
No, there was a different. We've got many boxes of these, and there is an older version, so I do apologise. I will. There is an online link in there to do it, but I will make sure you get the right copies and what have you, and I'll clarify that for you. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Councillor. Thanks for doing that. Sorry, that wasn't embarrassing, really, was it?
Thank you very much. Obviously, good to see that people do the detail, and thank you for those presentations. Really useful for me, and I know everyone else as well. Before we finish, just the second recommendation was to identify any future areas of work that the committee would like, and I think Mr. Goldsmith has quite kindly offered to bring some of his experts back to talk about specific infrastructure, which is what the original matrix was, and if everyone is content for that, for Catherine to try and plan that into a future presentation, that would be really useful. So I think that's probably it for that. Is everyone in agreement? Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate that you've taken the time out to come and speak to us. We have another item on the agenda, so if you'd like to leave, you're more than welcome to stay. If not, thank you very much. Have a safe trip home.
I'm actually on incident duty this evening, so I'll probably I'll take my leave. But thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that brings us on to the next item on the agenda, which is the second scrutiny matrix, which is to do with broadband connectivity and communications, which was submitted by Councillor Pembalak, who I will give the microphone to introduce the matrix before we have our expert from the County Council.
I think the matrix or the request that I put in is pretty well self-explanatory. But what I'm going to say is to put a bit of people's personal views into the mix so that you understand. Today I'm receiving and indeed experiencing failing connectivity. I spoke only last Friday with a highly respected retired county councillor who lost her broadband connection for some period of time, and with it her VoIP telephone. We will all have to have such connection from 2025 when landlines are disconnected. In order to communicate with her supplier, she had to use mobile. However, the signal in her location is very intermittent.
I can confirm that as driving down the A606 past Normanton-on-the-Wolds, where she lives, if you're on the phone, you more often than not lose the connection. The lady resorted to the now unreliable post to contact her supplier. In 2024, this should not be happening. We are a supposedly developed nation, and Rushcliffe need to support their residents. Digital switchover will cause enormous problems, particularly for those households or with personal alarms supplied by Rushcliffe. And digital switchover was highlighted in the Local Government Association magazine recently. I live in a village which is still experiencing occasional power cuts and now very poor mobile signals. These scenarios are covered in this leaflet, but not answered. All the mobile signals and broadband have got worse, presumably through increased demand. Children can't do homework, Zoom and Teams meetings are fragmented. All of this has increased over the COVID period, and we are now very reliant on all this connectivity. Opportunities are limited for working from home, which of course impacts people's job opportunities. Contacting the doctor becomes difficult. My particular worry, being in a very rural village, is for the farming community who often are working in isolated fields on heavy machinery. If there is an accident, they have no mobile signal and cannot summon help. Whilst I say these are rural issues and there are not spots in the rural community, I believe there are still even not spots in West Bridgford. We need to ensure consistent and workable level of connectivity across the borough for our residents. You can have these if you want them. I don't know whether I sent this to you, I think, Catherine. Yeah, but I picked that up on Friday, so I'll let you have that as well.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm particularly pleased to welcome Mr. Stoddard from the County Council, who's we appreciate we're not a mobile provider as such. You've come to give us a presentation on digital connectivity from the County Council's perspective. Thank you for attendance. Thank you for your patience during the last issue item, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you about digital connectivity. My name, as I said, is Ian Stoddart. I'm recently in post Digital Connectivity Manager for Nottinghamshire County Council and Derbyshire. I have previously worked in this role elsewhere in the country. If you'd like to go to the next slide. We'll cover off firstly the stats and view that we have of the existing rollouts. The key is that the programs that have been put in place originally with Better Broadband for Nottinghamshire, which is a super fast. Please don't hesitate to ask me if there's some of the technical jargon gets out there, because we get used to it, and I will try and avoid it if I can. Superfast is essentially 30 megabits per second download to 80. That's the technology. It typically originally was full fiber to the fiber to the cabinet, copper to the house, as I like to put it. But all the telecommunications companies decided to market that as fiber, just to confuse everybody. We've seen as you can see in the graph there, which I think really does show the adoption with a lot more clarity. We are at a state with super fast of around 98.8% coverage across Nottinghamshire and 98.6% coverage in Rushcliffe. Now, I know one of the...
Sorry to interrupt. Could you just tell us which of those lines is which on...
I was just going to go on to that. So, because there are different measures, Openreach as I understand it, really wanted to push on the 24 megabits as super fast, but EU and everybody else said no, 30. So you get two lines going up the top there, which are very much at the mature stage. super fast. Just to add into some complexity, I couldn't get rid of the red line because this is from another source. So ignore that for now, because there is a technology called GFast that is limited in terms of its application and deployment, and that red line is essentially meant to be 100 meg plus. Still not necessarily fiber. The black line is gigabit capable. That is anything up to 1,000 megabits per second. The black line indicates where essentially Virgin upgraded their networks that they already had in place as a result of the cable access TVs network they put in, that takes them up to 900 meg deployable download, and the government accepted that as a gigabit capable as part of their project Gigabit Go Forward. The bottom line, the yellow line, is full fibre. We are trying to promote that as as the future-proofed means to communicate over broadband. At this stage, it will fall behind until Virgin decide they want to upgrade, and if they want to upgrade to full fibre to give them that capacity, or come in with a new technology that enables them to go above what they're already delivering. So, Better Broadband for Nottinghamshire scheme brought in around 31 million. It's covered across 87,000 premises. It was designed across the whole of the UK to address market failures where there is unlikely to be, or not going to be, a commercial upgrade to reach a premise. It's a very mixed picture when you go into the real detail, because it's never quite linear. Those people are, those people aren't. It's very much dependent upon how they've deployed the equipment and the network designs, the geospatial elements that they put in, because it's a large chunk of capital to do that, and they're looking to it, and the commercial organisations are looking to exploit, whether it's full super fast or full fibre that we see in the future, and therefore there'll be some premises that won't get it in the first pass because they are not commercially attractive. Just to give an indication, in an urban area, the typical cost per premise pass that people will quote, which is what the bottom line that the organisations look at, is around £250 per premise. The cost in a rural area is at 2,500. Now, those are very broad measures. They're just indicative. I'm sure we could all find examples where they're a little bit more or a little bit less, but that's the sort of thing that we are faced with in terms of the economics. So we've delivered, as part of that programme, around 16,000, just over 16,000 premises within that programme. Those programmes are combinations of public subsidy, where the county council acts as effectively the commissioning body. We don't own the assets. We're managing that intervention on behalf of the government because of the local knowledge. You'll see a combination of subsidised and commercial as part of that rollout. So we do see a little bit of a greater reach. The other aspect of that programme was the Gigabit Voucher Scheme in its original state, which solely run by BDUK, which is, for anybody who doesn't know, is Building Digital United Kingdom, which is the executive agency of the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, was DCMS before. They own the subsidy control and the plans on behalf of the government. The target, what we have seen is a change in technology as well during that process. So originally everybody had their eyes fixed on the prize of 30 to 80 megabits per second. Then people realised that when you put these things out, the performance was variable, because the further away you are from a cabinet, the less signal or less download capacity. as a bit of a nuance, and I've dealt with this a number of times, you will find that there are people within or premises within that build area that will have full fibre as part of that process. And the reason being is that Openreach decided to stop rolling out FTTC in around 2017 to 2019, and also realised that in order to reach the numbers within any of these contracts, it would become uneconomic because they'd have to add in additional cabinets, which would cost huge amounts of money. So they started deploying what I would call Generation 1 full fibre. Generation 1 full fibre, one strand of fibre to one premise, one light wave. It's full fibre uses laser light. You only have one frequency you can use on that. So it's very limited, and each fibre cable has a number of cores. So when I talk about fibre cable, it's made up of a bundle of fibre optic strands. That limits it. So what you'll get sometimes is one neighbour has full fibre, Generation 1, and another will have super fast or even older exchange lines. And it's not always something that's easy to understand or explain from a distance, because it's down to whoever did the network planning and how they deployed that capital against the design specs. The voucher scheme originally was £1,500 per premise, £3,500 if it's a business. That's now got up to £4,500. There were 516. There were four communities within Rushcliffe, which is Witherton, Whitefield Farm, Plumtree, and Kingston on Saw that went for that scheme. The voucher scheme relies on somebody deciding they're going to build and then getting all the residents involved within that target area. It has pluses and minuses. In the original £1,500 per premise, I wasn't a great fan personally, because it never really had enough money to address truly rural areas. Plus, we had a lot of situations where there were sometimes communities that were signing up for vouchers and suppliers didn't actually deliver because they came away going, no, it's going to cost too much and we can't get it within that voucher scheme. So it didn't always deliver. That's where we are in terms of the existing broadband. We then move into Project Gigabit. The decision was made that full fibre would be, or gigabit capable rather than full fibre was the target. That's 100 meg to 1,000 meg in rough terms download. If you want to go to the next slide, please. The challenge, if you think back to the previous slide where you're talking about superfast being up at 98.6%, if you're then starting at a new technology, you are effectively going to at some stage overbuild what you've already built, because you're not going to be able to transfer that technology, FTTC, to go full fibre or gigabit. So you're starting again in a sense, and then looking to go and catch up. So that those sites at the very extreme ends of the spectrum, in terms of the outliers, the very hard to reach, aren't necessarily always any nearer to getting that those getting built. BDUK tried to come out with a scheme where they called outside in, where they build those first. It didn't take off because the suppliers in general didn't work in terms of the economics plus the amount of subsidy that you could or could not apply. Where we now got to with Project Gigabit, there's a £5 billion pot of public subsidy. The targets are 80% commercial build by 2025 and 5% public subsidy. And then, depending where you where you talk, DLUC came out with a figure where they were looking at 99% of premises covered by 2030. And I will address the length of time it takes to roll out broadband, and hopefully it'll help explain some of the challenges there. Whether you will ever get to 100%, there's debates about that. I can point you to a lot of areas where it's been deployed, but there are still premises that aren't covered because residents have decided, or landlords have decided, they don't want the full fibre. And if you don't give a permission for a wayleaf or a network access agreement, it's not going to happen. So there is one of those little challenges there. You also get change of use and various other things. The other key aspect to this is that we are only focusing on existing premises, not new developments. New developments have a separate set of regulations. They come with building regs that mean they have proper ducting that can be used. And they're also got, since December 2022, they have to be provided with gigabit capable solutions. So new premises aren't so much of an issue, it's purely existing. Project Gigabit in Nottinghamshire, there's just recently been awarded Lot 10. Lot 10 covers quite a... I'm trying to give this in a way that's easy to understand. BDUK split all the country up into different, what they call different lots. They don't always conform to traditional local authority or county boundaries. So you will get a crossover. Hence, I have to speak to colleagues and I have to put my Derbyshire hat on and speak to colleagues in Lincolnshire and various other places to understand the full picture. Lot 10 covers within Nottinghamshire circa 20,000 premises that are what they class as gigabit white, i.e. there's no commercial plans or upgrades or likelihood of them being built to. There's just over 3,400 in Rushcliffe. The map gives you an idea of where they are. You'll notice they're mostly in the rural areas because those are the ones that'll be the outliers. Because of distance, they'll be hardest to reach. Just to give you an idea of scale, the whole build out of that lot 10 is around, and I believe just Nottinghamshire, it's around 330 kilometres of build. Process will take some time. It's just been awarded. They're in the deployment stage. The deployment stage is they're going to go out there and survey, but they'll do it in phases. The first phase will be what they call their network spine, which is a big loop that goes all the way around Nottingham. They'll be going around, and those will follow what's called, what is called Open Reach PIA routes, which is public internet access. Those are existing ducts and poles. The spine will be a ducted route, and the ability to put fibre through that to create the spine of the network is very much down to what they uncover in the survey. The survey is subject to access to the roads. They have to put in permits. They have to put in through the various process. And when they do go through it, they can uncover blockages from silt, collapsed ducts, and various stoppages from, even things where I had one where somebody poured cement down the duct. Just a builder, and it was accidental. The point then is that they will have to get round the blockage. That may involve incursion into carriageway. If you're driving around, you may see these little channels or trenches that go in little loops on the road. That is typically where somebody's gone around a blockage. That all takes time to resource and build. you haven't even got to getting the deployment out to the local premises. They then build out from there. There's going to be a challenge of getting way leaves if they have to. Most of it will be done in public street under the 2003 Communications Act, ECC, which Electronic Communications Code, and they can build and put those on there with limited development or permitted development rights. So we don't have a control over that. There are a number of cabinets that will go out there. They will be key to it. The timescales at this moment in time, and I would say it's advisory, and I wouldn't hold them to it, is that they will finish the deployment by, in terms of mapping and proving everything, by May, June. The build out from there will be 12, 24 months out from that point. So the things that it is a moving target. It's been awarded to a company called Connexin. They're not going to be digging up everything. So there shouldn't be huge amounts of disruption, but there will be disruption. We as the county council are working with our highways and the supplier and BDUK to try and speed that up. They have a phrase they talk about barrier busting. I've tried to turn that around and focus on barrier avoidance. So if we can see things and help speed it up, we will. And as I say, that will fill in some of the areas. It won't finish and it won't cover everything. The other initiative that we are involved in, next slide please, is gigahubs. This is a separate government scheme to connect schools, GPs, libraries. There was originally a lot more. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, some of those premises have been what we call de-scoped, removed, because we can't put public subsidy against them because somebody has said they're going to build. So we did have around 8 in Rushcliffe. That's now down to 2. And that's not because we just want to take them off. It's because those are the only 2 that we can see that don't have any commercial plans. We are hoping to get the contract finalised by the end of this month, fingers crossed, and we'll start seeing deployment of that. We are waiting for an updated quote, and we will keep everybody informed of how that progress goes. I'd like to go to the next slide, please. Nottinghamshire County Council was successful in bidding for some money from the Digital Pathways scheme, which got around £20,000. As part of that, we undertook a scheme to map mobile coverage across the whole of Nottinghamshire. That was done with BCU, Birmingham City University, as the partner in delivering that. These aren't yet publicly available because we're still waiting for all the data. Essentially, the BCU created a device that monitors all 4 networks. That was put into refuse lorries, and they went round because they go at a very slow speed, and therefore it gives you data accuracy. There's something like 4 million plus data points. Those maps will show you that is purely Rushcliffe Borough. The green is a good signal. The red is poor. There is very few complete not spots, but there is further work to be done in terms of interpolation and analysis to see whether we can get some more accuracy out of that. As I say, that's why we can't release it just now, because I don't think it's meaningful until we've done that. The difference between that and what you'll get outside, if you go to Ofcom on the Connected Nations database and the suppliers, a lot of them are modelled, taking in the signal propagation and they're fairly sophisticated, but they're not necessarily accurate. What we can't also legislate for is what and demonstrate is what the signal will be inside a premise. That is really only to the external, and then that's why we're looking at the additional interpolation of whether we can do anything there that gives people an indication of whether they're likely to get something inside. The problem being that in a lot of, we have found time and again, both in the fixed broadband and the mobile, that you will find issues inside houses. Somebody's got 5 RSJs in an extension, you've created a Faraday cage which blocks the signal, as a simplistic example. Or they've put their Wi-Fi next to the microwave next to a cordless phone. It blocks out the signal. The purpose of going through this is to give people a far greater accuracy and understanding of what's there, to also influence discussions with MNOs, to try and push on coverage where we can see some weaknesses, and to understand that what this doesn't give you, though, and it's a point that you mentioned earlier, which is you might get a signal, but you might get very poor actual response from it, because there's two things. One is reach, that's that you're getting a signal. The other one is the actual capacity in the network. We are looking at that may be stage 2 of this and into the future, because it's very difficult to model what is the capacity on the network, because it fluctuates from minute to minute, day to day, depending on the load. You will see this, a good example is if Nottingham Forest are at home, they've got a match on, people will always anecdotally tell you they can't get onto their mobile whilst they're there. And that is a capacity issue, not a signal reach issue. And that is one of the things that nobody's really squared away. We see it with events. I've seen areas taken out which affect wider area. There's been an event with lots of people arriving, suddenly the capacity is taken up, and a wider area is impacted. So again, we're looking at that this would hopefully inform. One of the challenges, and you'll notice the picture there of a little, what's called a small cell mobile mast. One of the other challenges that comes out in the marketplace at this moment in time is what mobile phone companies call densification. Basically, it's everybody wants more from what's already there. One of the challenges is everybody wants to download more and more data. How do you supply that to the users? And it isn't just a matter of sticking up more masts, because unfortunately, you stick more masts up, you can actually cancel each other out. So it's in terms of, it gets a very complex piece in terms of macro masts. Plus, people don't like dirty, great big high masts. And often it's cited to me, well, I've been on holiday, such and such a place, and I could get 5G, 4G everywhere. And then you go, yes, and they've got 100-meter masts and regular ones and better coverage because they're doing it in that way. Maximum mast height you're allowed is 50 meters. And they do cause issues. What you're also seeing, and I'm sure you've noted, is there's these white or green pole masts. They're not macro masts, as you've got here at the back of the car park. You've got two essentially macro masts. They're sort of mid-masts which cover a local area. And you'll notice, same as the commercial picture with fixed broadband, is that they are often near high densities of new builds and population, because you have a contract, I can get 4 people covering there easily. The small cell is one of these approaches that people are looking at to cover off densification, so you get under the signal block up, because a small cell will sit on a street lamp and will have something like up to a kilometre range. So it's a very localised, and it's more appropriate for urban areas than rural. We were hoping that it might be a solution in rural, but sadly not. The other thing, and so what we have undertaken is a full review of the assets of street lamps. We have approached various different providers. The MNOs themselves don't typically engage in saying, I want a mast there. They use third parties, companies like Ontix. There's about 4 of them in the main actor. We've approached them all. We've given all the information. As I understand it, we haven't had any bites where they've come back and said, yeah, we definitely want to put something here and we can improve the coverage in these areas. So hence, the mapping becomes vitally important in terms of revealing and showing people, look, this is what we're really seeing. How's this going to help us move this forward? And there's a whole raft, which I won't go into now, in terms of side benefits there. You know, one small example, if you've got people like social workers going out there and they're single workers and they're going into an area and they can see that there's no signal, should they be going there? Because they're being put at risk. And those are things that we need to consider. So that's where we are on the mobile network coverage. That doesn't mean it's the be all and end all, but going through this, trying to push the market. There is a government intervention. It's called the Shared Rural Network. I do not see that being something that will be deployed in rural Nottinghamshire. They put I think it was 500 million, 400 million that has been used in Scotland. So they're putting those into areas that are really very, very remote. The only other option that we've got apart from that is satellite. The advent of Starlink and other low Earth orbit satellites does fix a lot of problems. It works. I had an 83-year-old farmer install it and it made a huge difference. He did it himself. It's that easy. But it's expensive. It's £75 per month, I believe, at the current rate. So, you know, if you do have somebody who's in the middle of what I term their wild blue ulu, is going to be left potentially years, there is a solution out there. One of the other things that I've implemented, but we haven't implemented yet in Nottinghamshire, is trying to get people to consider looking at 4G to the external of the building. You can go and get people who'll do rural signal tests, and they'll prove your 360 coverage and tell you whether you can or can't get anything. It's not a guarantee, but if you're at 2 megabits per second download using old exchange lines, ADSL, and you can get 20 to 50, that might be a significant improvement in short term, and it's something to consider. And it has been successful in some very rural areas that I've seen elsewhere. Next slide, please. So the other one, which is a big bone of contention, which is PSTN switch off. There is a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt. You have press who are putting out stories that I've seen where it says you're all going to lose your phones. It's far more nuanced. You will have noted that the government has put a lot of pressure on providers and there's been a little bit of a stay of execution, and while they're looking at things, there have been problems. They're not huge numbers of problems that I've been able to identify or seen, but I have seen situations in isolated cases where there have been individuals who've had their full fibre, they've had their existing lines swapped to full fibre when they shouldn't have. That's not meant to happen. There are this set of discussions where if you identify as a vulnerable person, you will not be moved to full fibre unless you want it to. So you can still, as we understand it, there may still be situations where you can use the existing exchange line. You can, if you only have voice, don't have broadband, you will be able to use VoIP, because that's all they're going to do. Is they can, bit of potted history. Many years ago, we had one line that came into our houses. We then started using modems and faxes, and you couldn't call if you had the fax or the modem on. They added in a second using the existing one, so you could have voice and data separated. And now all we're doing is converging that, because with Internet Protocol you can split the digital, and using digital you can split the signal, so you can use voice and data and video and everything in the same thing. So all in one sense that's happening is we're going back to having a single line. They have a product from Openreach called Sagia and SOTAP, which are basically standard offering general Ethernet access, and it's basically running the new services over existing infrastructure. The driver in one sense is that Openreach has 5,600 exchanges. They're going to be closing 4,000. They don't need them. They don't need the size, because everything has been condensed down. Even if we look at the cabinets that have been put in for as part of Superfast, they're already talking about swapping those out and using those for electric vehicle charging, because they all get fixed by three-phase power, and there is a shortage of power in this country. So that becomes a different use, because you only need a small amount. It will save Openreach a huge amount of money, and save them a huge amount of money in terms of capital on or outgoings on their property portfolio. The technology, we all use it anyway, in terms of FaceTiming or whatever. It's the same sort of technology. The bandwidth required for voice is small. It's very small. So you're not, if you are going to be on that, the only difference is that you'll be using a power source inside your house to power that additional device, which is the fibre terminating unit. In a way, it's no different than you having a cordless phone. If you've got a cordless phone and the power goes, you're not going to be able to make a call. People are used to that. It's the same sort of thing. So there is a lot of uncertainty and confusion. It hasn't been communicated well. They are trying to address that. I remember I've only been in post in, I think it was 4 or 5 weeks. The first week I was here, I heard my first advert, which was on Classic FM, where BT were going out and telling Openreach was telling everybody about this full fibre, this digital voice. What you're also seeing is that everybody is a lot of people are ditching landlines, just using mobile. That's where, because, and that's where we're seeing things going. Yes, there are problems where there are areas where if you have a landline or you're using a fixed line broadband service and there isn't good mobile, because I've seen it. I've seen residents taken out for 8 weeks by a squirrel chewing through a fibre. The challenge there is that all of the telcos use contractors now. So when it comes to provisioning, it's not like, oh, I'll ring up and get an engineer and we'll come out there and just fix things. So in some rural areas, at worst case, I would say if that line goes down, it could be anything between 6 to 8 weeks. But the immediate reaction is, I'll send you out a 4G router, which, to use a hackney phrase, is about as much use as chocolate fireguard if you haven't got 4G signal and 4G signal in that house. So again, go back to the key thing, you do need, certainly with vulnerable people and certainly overseas, to make sure they're registering with the telco provider or the ISP, because just to make things even more confusing, the person that you would pay your bill to isn't necessarily the network provider. So Openreach, separate entity, effectively the BT, but you may find Sky, Vodafone, TalkTalk, everyone else uses that same network. So you have to go to your ISP. Telecare, there's a lot of work going on. I've spoken to my colleagues in Nottinghamshire County Council. They're going through a process. There is a whole load of test beds and work going on in terms of making some of those products IP compliant. There's a lot of different standards that are out. I won't try and go through into that because I don't fully understand myself, but there is work, it is acknowledged, and there are a lot of people looking at potential alternatives. So it is understood. They are looking at fixing that. Whether it will be completely fixed, I cannot give you an assurance. There have been letters that have gone out from senior departments in the government, and I have seen it, and I'm sorry I can't recall the exact reference, which is going out to all of the different telecare providers and network providers saying you've got to make sure you cover that off. The only other thing that to point, if vulnerable people, BT, retail, our understanding is that there is this push to offer power backup to give you something of up to 3 hours battery backup if you can pay for. The challenge really is nobody, in terms of power networks, we're talking about something completely different there. And yes, there's a single point of failure. There is today on the existing infrastructure. It's down to resilience, and we've moved into an environment where you can effectively say that individual premises are becoming essentially micro data centers. If you create a data center, you'll take a view in terms of risk versus cost versus outage as to whether you will look at other means to protect those premises. Now, for some, that's going to be impossible. That's going to be too costly. So I don't know how that's going to pan out. But essentially, a battery backup. Some rural areas, I've seen some farmers just use leisure batteries, or they've got their own generators. That's not always affordable or available to everybody in a rural area. You will have noted recently that Oliver Dowden went on press to point out that everybody needs to consider their own resilience. I think this is sort of harking to these things, that there is an element of that, which I can't fix. We can't fix necessarily. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Really comprehensive. I'm impressed at the amount of data that you've compiled as an authority. I suppose the only thing from me before I open it to everyone else is, how can we as Rushcliffe work with you to try and ensure that the effects of that is minimised to some of our more vulnerable and rural communities?
It's just constant communication in terms of us giving you updates, talking through, trying to highlight data that we see. One of the things I didn't mention is that the County Council is going to be launching a Nottinghamshire observatory, which has lots of data in that. What we're trying to do is put in quite a considerable amount of mapping data to help people inform what's involved in terms of coverage in terms of full fibre, super fast, and against all other types of useful information, including things like social deprivation and so on and so forth. It's an evolving case, and I would just say we will lobby and lobby hard. I've upset Openreach in the past, and others. We are passionate as a team and as a body to support residents and businesses and third sector, voluntary sector organisations, because we truly understand the impact it can make to people in their lives.
Thank you. Any questions from any of the rest of the committee? Councillor Chewings.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, really. First of all, thank you for the presentation. As the Chair has mentioned, very informative and very detailed. So thank you very much for that, very useful. You provide the figures, and I forgot now, it was 98.6.
98.8% for county, 98.6%.
Yeah, so there's
super fast.
So there's a variance between Rushcliffe and the rest of Nottinghamshire. Appreciate any 0.2.
Yeah.
But is there any blockages that's causing that, why it's lower, or is it just a case of it's a variance?
It's a variance on what you're at the stage, because if you remember that graph that goes back, we're right at that top end, what you're seeing is essentially, you might see a change once every 2-3 months. They get more data, but you're at that real maturity stage, and they're not going to be going out and installing any more full fibre cabinet. Fibre to the cabinet. That's it.
Yeah.
That's where you're at, and that's what I'm saying with the full fibre. You're playing that catch up to get to that level, and then exceeding to get to 100%.
Okay, great, thank you. Just looking through the rest of the information, I'm glad you brought up Starlink on my computer. Is there anything that we can do to try and promote that service? Because there is, as you say, there's houses out there, they're not going to get this service for years. So how can we, as an organisation, as a council, push and say, look, there is an alternative there. It is expensive, but if you need this is available for you. And then just one other point, which is just about the power backup. So I've got fibre to my house, a VoIP, although I don't use it because I use my landline.
Yeah.
But the first option I had when I went to order it was a battery backup provided by Virgin. So that was provided straight away to give that reassurance that if you do move across, places like Virgin, they're offering you an option of having that battery backup.
Yeah.
And it wasn't actually that expensive to go for either.
Again, I've had one in the spectrum where you're talking to somebody who's on a limited income, who's a pensioner, and you turn around and mention that they may cost you anything. Depends on your needs. They can cost separately anything from 65 to a few £100, £300-400, depending on what your needs are. And it's one of the things I say to people: if you have critical electrically powered devices, you do need to think about that resilience. You can buy things that are the same as that they use in servers and data centers, which are called UPSs, and you can just plug in devices, plug it into wall, it'll keep you going. There's even the point where they're considering that there are, electric vehicles can act as a battery backup to your premise. Now, there's technical limitations. You've got to have bi-directional power coming in from that. But those are the sorts of things that everybody's doing. The other thing to note, you may have seen within associated, as I would put it, in the power side of things, that there are people who are deploying big banks of batteries in containers, because we've gone to green energy. Green energy is not a flick of the switch. So you've got to control the supply, and that will over time add in some resilience and give people some contingency. But the other thing to point out is we will hopefully there's a lot of this information out there to help residents. We will, in terms of other information, we're about using Starlink, things on PSTN. We're reviewing it at the moment. In my previous role, we made sure that information was very much out there in places that are accessible and will happily cooperate. We have found that sometimes it being from the council gives people a little bit more comfort than it's a sales type call from somebody else.
Thank you. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Is there, in general, a sort of minimum expectation from government, from the regulators, as to broadband speed people should get? Because I know of houses that are not necessarily in the middle of nowhere, but they're still getting, when you connect up to this fast thing that tells you what your broadband speed is, they're getting 1.8 mega, whatever it is.
So there is an option called the universal service obligation. It's meant for anybody who's getting less than 10 megabits per second, you have the right to go and apply for that. Now, there comes a health warning with that. It's money that's being provided and solely run by Openreach or BT at this moment in time. I've only personally seen one instance where that has successfully been deployed. And that was where there were 20 plus premises. So if you're an isolated premise, you will have seen in the news, I think recently in the Daily Mail, where somebody in Lincolnshire was being quoted £100,000 plus, because if you want, and if they, and under that, if they can't provide it to you, can't do it, because they'll give you a 4G router, which, right, that is under consultation. BDUK are looking at what they call very hard to reach and the USO, and to what is appropriate, because things have moved on. Whether that means that there will be things, and this is purely conjecture, where they'll say, actually, we're never going to get that out there to that place because it's 6 miles from the nearest fibre exchange. It costs £38 per metre to bury that cable or whatever it is over the top. Here's your Starlink. Here's a subsidised figure, go away, type thing. I don't know. I mean, that's some of the thoughts that are going out there, and where we will end up. Again, it's one of those things that if we can get full fibre to people, that is the best option, because the way I'd explain it, this is a completely new network. You might be using some of the same poles and that. It is new. This is existential change. The last time something was done like this was when people first started rolling out telephones and power. So that's how much of a change it is. We haven't even scratched the surface of what fibre can do for us. In terms of the bandwidth and download, it's, there's some lab in Japan that's got it down to terabits per second, which is mind-blowing compared to, you've got 1.8 megabits per second. The issue with all of these things, huge amounts of capital, and it's got to be cost effective. We will see a consolidation that may, as we've seen with cable access TV, if you all remember, it was Diamond round here, and then it's eventually, via various different iterations, ended up with just one provider, which is Virgin. Something similar is going to happen. But the one thing I would say, if you take Rushcliffe as an example, you've got two network providers, Virgin and OpenReach, or BT OpenReach. That choice and that option to have multiple network providers does keep competition in play and does ensure that pricing is kept key. So whilst there is disruption, I would always urge people to consider that having that choice can give you other benefits.
Can I just point about on the mobile side of things, picking up on what Councillor Cumberland said, that you're driving along and no mobile or poor mobile signal. But am I correct in thinking that so much depends on which network you're with? Because you can be driving along a road and you get zero signal with O2, say, but you get 4 bars with EE. So do you think the day will come when the mobile networks will somehow share their masts and things, and so that people are getting a signal, even though they may be signed up with VE, but they're getting the signal from...
In a sunlit utopia, yes.
Oh, right, okay.
I've
been too positive thinking then, I'm too simplistic.
Technologically, it's capable of being done now, but everybody wants their competitive edge. I've invested in a huge amount of capital. I want to sweat those assets.
Yeah.
Do I therefore want to allow people to share? There's a lot of good noises. Mobile UK, this is their trade and representative body, but I think reality is, we may see there's a merger going on which will reduce or proposed merger subject to competition that may give a better coverage map. But there's also another thing to consider, which is what you see on your phone with bars. It's representative. It's not necessarily reflective of what's out there in the network. So you can get a situation where, when you're looking at the huge amount of infrastructure that they're trying to control, they'll vary things like power output on a mast due to demand. That power of variation can affect the broadcast range, and you can find in one day you're in getting it and another day you're not. you can find that during winter you're getting signal, during summer you're not, or not as well, because leaves are out, they contain water, water blocks the signal to a degree. So there's a lot of factors. You know, I don't envy anybody trying to plan out a network, whether it's fixed or mobile, with a limited amount of money. You know, you are going to make compromises to a degree, and that's the nature of the beast. And hopefully what we're doing and helping is fix some of those holes, but we're not going to on the mobile spectrum.
Thank you very much. Really comprehensive. A very interesting presentation. And thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us this evening.
Really interesting. It's a complex subject with a lot of things that people throw out technically, a lot of misperceptions. If we can help provide some clarity and some, you know, non-technical speak to explain how it works, etc., and what the challenges are, we'll always happily take those calls, and more than happy to field anything from yourself.
Thank you.
You've just said that it may be worse in the summer than the winter because leaves contain moisture. Does that mean during these storms that we've had, there's a lot of moisture around, that things could be difficult?
There can be atmospheric impacts on signals. If you get, you know, if you remember the days of satellite TV and Sky, you'd have a big thunderstorm and suddenly you're losing your signal. Those things will, you can't get away from it. Anything that is wireless can, I mean, there's a lot of clever technology. They try to reduce it, but it can be impacted by the atmospherics that are around, especially precipitation, rain, snow. The only other thing to bear in mind, you also can get some false positives, as I would call it, where you get signal bounce that can reflect and extend out to places where people, and it's not consistent. I mean, one of the things they're considering at the moment is creating like signal mirrors. I think that's the best way. Signal mirrors that will project a signal because it will reflect off into an area that's not covered. So we are going to, as a body ourselves, we will look at all different technologies to see how we can fix some of these problems, and if that's something that's appropriate, whether that's private 5G networks. You know, there's a out in rural Wales, in Monmouthshire, they've covered a whole area called the Clantony Valley with 5G because they were never going to get, because it's right by the Black Mountains, they were never going to get fixed fibre up there, and they fixed that. Other people have started to look at Wi-Fi off of lampposts, 60 gigahertz spectrum, to avoid digs as another option. So we are going to look at any particular way of making sure that there is a sustainable, viable technology, not just something that sounds good. Good example recently, Ofcom have stopped all the licenses for what they call TV white noise spectrum. It was an area that was meant to be going to be used to extend rural areas. A great new thing that they were now, it's died there.
Thank you very much. I think I've learned a great deal from that, and I think what we've all realised is actually that the county is on top of it, this issue. So thank you very much for that presentation. Really useful. The two recommendations are there to review the scrutiny matrix, which we've done, and ask questions, and then identify, has anyone got any areas of further work or updates that they feel that we need to know about as a committee? Are we content that the county seems to have things under control? Well, brilliant. Just a bit. Thank you very much. That takes us to the last item, which is just the work programme for the future meetings. So we've got the review of the crematorium and infrastructure delivery in July meeting, and accessible housing for the October meeting. Can everyone agree that programme, please? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, which draws our meeting to a close. Thank you all. I appreciate we've gone on for quite some time, and thank you for your indulgence.